The sickeningly sweet scent of gardenia was the first thing that hit me, assaulting my senses the moment David hung his expensive cashmere coat on the rack. It was cheap, cloying, completely foreign to our home, the kind of scent that screams desperation, not sophistication. I knew, instantly, that horrible crystalline clarity when the universe delivers the truth right into your gut. I didn't even need to search his pockets, but I did anyway. Tucked deep into the inner compartment of his wallet, behind his license, was a crumpled receipt for 2 glasses of Chardonnay and a single martini, dated just 2 hours earlier, from a downtown bar he claimed he never frequented. There are moments in life that don't just shift your reality. They shatter the glass floor beneath you, leaving you suspended over an abyss. Before I continue telling you how I carefully constructed my methodical revenge, I need a quick pause. If you're hearing this story, right now I want you to drop a comment below telling me your city and the time you're listening. It helps me feel connected to you, even when I'm reliving the darkest parts of my past. My name is Amelia. For nearly 2 decades, I lived what I genuinely believed was the perfect life in suburban Dallas. David was my rock, my partner, the man who remembered exactly how I liked my coffee and whose hand still sought mine in the darkness. We built our dream home. We traveled. And we shared a trust so deep, I never considered the possibility of a fissure. The only person I trusted as much as David was Chloe, our next-door neighbor. She was practically family, always dropping by for wine night and offering unsolicited, yet usually helpful advice about everything from landscaping to the stock market. I had absolute, unflinching faith in my husband and in the sanctity of our friendship with Chloe. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. I share these stories, my stories, and sometimes the stories you send me. Because silence is what protects the perpetrators, and I am done being silent. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of raw, unfiltered truth. We were a portrait of stability. Our mornings were a synchronized ballet. I'd be in the kitchen making breakfast while David checked his market reports, occasionally reading me some ridiculous headline. He traveled, frequently for his investment firm, and I never, ever questioned it. Why would I? We had an agreement, total honesty, no secrets. That agreement, I realize now, only applied to me. I was the fool who left my phone unlocked on the counter. He was the master who kept his face down and his life encrypted. The change was subtle at first, like the slow creep of ivy across a perfectly painted wall. It started 6 months before the gardenia bomb dropped. He started taking calls in the garage, speaking in lowered tones about sensitive client matters. His phone, once carelessly discarded, began living face down on the counter, often tucked beneath a stack of magazines. If I walked into the room unexpectedly, the phone would flash off instantly, followed by a manufactured smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just wrapping up," he'd say, overly casual. Then came the late nights. Traffic, mandatory client dinners, emergency meetings, the corporate. Excuses piled up like dirty laundry. He'd arrive after 9, smelling faintly of expensive scotch and occasionally, something I couldn't quite place. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself that pressure at work was wearing him down, that I was being overly sensitive. But the real red flag, the one that should have screamed betrayal, was the growing distance in his touch. He still kissed me goodbye, but the intimacy felt rote, a required performance before leaving the stage. I tried to ask him what was wrong, but he always shut it down with a sigh and a dismissive wave of the hand. "I'm stressed, Amelia. It's nothing to do with us." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But the lingering scent of cheap gardenia on that coat, the undeniable receipt for the 2 drinks, and his sudden frantic need to protect his privacy told a much darker story. I had enough evidence to confirm my suspicion. The next step was figuring out how to catch him, and I knew I couldn't risk a direct confrontation where he could simply lie his way out. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed the full, undeniable picture before I burned everything to the ground. That morning, I had planned to go into my office for a full day of meetings, but as I sat in the Houston traffic loop, a sudden, splitting headache, or perhaps the universe guiding me, told me to turn the car around and go back home. I didn't know it then, but I was about to walk into the very heart of my destruction, armed only with a throbbing migraine and the confirmation that the gardenia receipt wasn't just a mistake. The splitting headache was not a warning. It was a merciful, physical excuse. I needed the prescription strength medication I kept in the master bathroom cabinet, the kind that truly knocks out a migraine, not just dulls it. That's the logical answer I fed myself as I made the U-turn off the 610 loop and drove back, through the familiar streets of West University Place. I told myself it was the medicine, not the nagging suspicion that had been tightening its icy grip around my chest since I found that receipt. The sight of David's black Ford F-150 in the driveway stopped me cold. It was parked haphazardly, halfway up the curved walkway. He was supposed to be in Dallas today, presenting at a petroleum conference. A wave of nausea hit me, worse than the migraine. I cut the engine and sat, in the unnatural silence of the midday street, watching the heat shimmer above the asphalt. He must have forgotten something, I reasoned. Maybe he rushed home for a forgotten brief and was already gone. But the house was too quiet. The front door was unlocked, a detail that grated on my security-conscious nerves. I stepped inside the cool marble foyer. "David?" My voice echoed weakly, swallowed by the high ceilings. No response. The air, however, was thick. It was heavier than usual, almost humid, and overlaid with a scent that made my stomach clench instantly. It was the same cheap synthetic gardenia perfume that Jessica, our neighbor and my supposed confidant, always wore. I had smelled it 1,000 times during our Tuesday coffee mornings. Today, it was cloying, invasive, and completely out of place in our meticulously clean home. I didn't take the elevator. My feet carried me up the grand, sweeping staircase, each step a deliberate, agonizing choice. I was moving through an emotional minefield, expecting an explosion with every breath. Yet my body felt strangely light, detached. The scent grew stronger as I reached the landing. The door to the master suite was slightly ajar. I paused, pressing my back against the wall, listening. There was a low, rhythmic sound, not voices, not music. It was a primal, sickening sound that immediately confirmed every fear I had suppressed. The adrenaline rush was so intense it burned away the migraine entirely, replacing it with a crystalline clarity. I pushed the door open just wide enough to see. The sight was not merely shocking, it was an act of complete annihilation. It wasn't just physical intimacy. It was the casual, effortless betrayal etched onto David's relaxed face, the smirk of shared victory he exchanged with the woman who lay beneath him. Jessica, the woman who had asked me 2 weeks ago if I could recommend a good divorce attorney because Michael has been so distant lately. They were there, tangled in the ruins of my marriage, surrounded by the familiarity of our life. My favorite reading lamp, the custom headboard, the linens I had painstakingly selected. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the vase of flowers that sat on the hallway table. I didn't even drop my purse. The hysterical wife they had likely anticipated, the one who would rage and weep, giving them a chance to minimize and lie, was, gone. In her place was a corporate strategist facing a hostile takeover. My fingers found the familiar glass of my phone, slipping it out of my purse with surgical precision. I unlocked the screen silently. I did not call anyone. I opened the camera. For 30 excruciating seconds, I stood there, holding the phone steady, zooming slightly to capture the unmistakable features of both parties. I took photos first. High resolution, time-stamped proof. Then, I switched to video, capturing a panoramic view of the room to establish the location, their voices, a muffled giggle from her, a low groan from him, and the sheer, undeniable reality of the scene. This wasn't about moral outrage anymore. This was about evidence, about leverage, about securing my financial future. When I had enough, more than enough, I slowly, deliberately, pulled the door shut. The soft, final click of the latch was the sound of my old life being sealed away, ready for cremation. They hadn't heard me. They were too immersed in their filthy little moment to notice the architect of their downfall standing in the doorway. My legs were shaking violently as I descended the stairs, but my resolve was solid rock. I didn't stop until I reached the locked sanctuary of the downstairs home office. I needed air, and I needed an external target. David and Jessica were the perpetrators, but Michael, Jessica's husband, was the other victim, the other collateral. Damage. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Michael's number. He was the key to maximizing the destruction of their shared fantasy. He deserved to know, and together, we would ensure they paid the highest price. I took a deep breath, fighting the tremor in my voice. When he answered, the background noise of a busy airport terminal filtered through the line. "Michael," I said, my voice shockingly low and even, devoid of any recognizable emotion. "I need you to find a quiet place immediately. Put your phone on speaker and listen closely. What I'm about to tell you concerns Jessica, David, and the absolute end of the lives we thought we had. Do not hang up. Do not interrupt. You and I have a great deal of work to do." It all started approximately 1 hour before I made that call to Michael, back when the air in my own home was still breathable, before it became thick with betrayal. I had left the office abruptly at 3 o'clock. It wasn't a document I forgot, or a quick bank errand. It was a wave of nausea, and a pulsating migraine that made focusing on the quarterly budget impossible. David knew I was scheduled for back-to-back meetings until 6. He, supposedly, was supposed to be 3 states away, closing a big deal with a difficult client, a trip we had discussed extensively only the night before. All I craved was the cool, quiet solitude of our bedroom. Pulling my car into the driveway, the first flicker of unease ignited in my gut. Parked haphazardly near the peony bushes, where it certainly shouldn't have been, was David's silver Range Rover. I frowned. Perhaps he had forgotten his laptop and popped home quickly, deciding to work remotely from the office downstairs. I tried to reason away the immediate cold dread that spread from my chest outwards. I keyed the alarm code and pushed the front door open. The silence hit me first. It wasn't the expected quiet of an empty house. It was a heavy, stifled silence, unnatural and wrong. I kicked off my sensible pumps, letting them drop soundlessly onto the marble floor. I called out, "David, are you home?" No answer. Only the dull, suffocating quiet. As I moved toward the staircase, the second, more alarming sign registered: a perfume. Not the clean, sharp scent of my own minimalist fragrance, nor David's familiar hint of sandalwood. This was a floral explosion, heavy lily and cloying gardenia. Jessica, our neighbor, my confidant of 8 years, the woman who knew my deepest fears and shared my favorite coffee blend. My migraine dissolved completely, replaced by a hyper-alert surgical clarity. Every nerve ending screamed at me. I gripped the banister, my knuckles white, ascending the stairs one slow, deliberate step at a time. The carpet runner muffled my movements entirely. The closer I got to the landing, the stronger the sickening, sweet scent became. The master bedroom door was not closed. It was left slightly ajar, maybe an inch wide. A thin sliver of light escaped from the room, casting an elongated shadow on the hallway floor. My heart didn't race. Strangely, it seemed to slow down, preparing for impact. I didn't breathe. I didn't think. I simply extended my hand and pushed the door inward, silently, smoothly. The world fractured into a horrifying still life. The pristine white duvet, the symbol of our decade of shared intimacy, was ruined. There they were, entangled, oblivious in the dim afternoon light filtering through the closed blinds. David, my husband, and Jessica, the woman whose children played in our backyard. The scene was brutally unambiguous. I didn't scream. I didn't drop my bag. There was no explosion of rage or noise. The shock was purely physical, a cold, dense weight settling in my abdomen, instantly replacing the air that had been in my lungs. I felt nothing but an absolute, terrifying emptiness. The sight itself was a vulgar, disrespectful tableau. They weren't lovers. They were thieves caught ransacking the very core of my life. In that instant, my emotional mind disconnected entirely. It was the survival mechanism, the strategic switch flipping on. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands miraculously did not shake. They were steady, efficient. I unlocked the screen, navigated to the camera app, and hit the video record button. I stood there, just inside the threshold, recording. I filmed the whole scene. David's face, Jessica's hair, the clock on the bedside table showing 3:17 p.m. I zoomed in just enough to make the identification absolute, capturing the indisputable proof of the deepest betrayal imaginable. I needed evidence, not hysterics. Hysterics would give them leverage, an excuse to minimize the event as a moment of passion. This was not passion. This was a calculated destruction of 2 lives. When I felt the footage was sufficient, clear, damning, undeniable, I backed away, pulling the door closed with excruciating care, ensuring the latch clicked softly into place. They wouldn't have heard a thing. They were too absorbed in their filth. I didn't run downstairs. I walked calmly to the small guest bathroom down the hall and locked the door behind me. I leaned against the cool tile wall, finally allowing myself to take a shallow, ragged breath. I reviewed the video. It was perfect, ironclad. The next steps formed instantly in my mind, cold and logical. David was not the first target. Jessica was not the first target. The first step was securing an ally. Jessica also had a husband, Michael, a good man who was currently stuck on the other side of the country. Michael deserved the truth. And more importantly, Michael was the other half of the necessary equation for maximum impact. If they thought they could destroy my life and still salvage their own, they were gravely mistaken. I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead, my gaze settling on the contact list. I scrolled down until I found his name. This was the moment of tactical alignment, the necessary prelude to the complete nuclear detonation. I pressed the call button, listening to the monotonous ring on the line, mentally rehearsing the precise, controlled language I would use. I had to be perfect, because this call wasn't about pain. It was about power, and I was about to reclaim every single piece they thought they had stolen. The throbbing pain behind my eyes was a cruel joke, a physical manifestation of the impending disaster I didn't yet know was coming. I had been in a crucial meeting, 3 hours into a presentation that demanded absolute focus, when the light-sensitive migraine hit. It was the kind of debilitating pain that rendered me useless, forcing me to apologize curtly and leave the office building in downtown Atlanta immediately. I simply needed the dark, cool silence of my own bedroom in Marietta, and I needed it. Now. Driving home felt like an eternity. The late afternoon sun scorching through the windshield, intensifying the nausea. I remember pulling into the driveway, grateful for the familiar sight of the colonial house, but something was immediately wrong. His car, the sleek black sedan he always drove, was already parked in the garage. I checked my watch. 4 o'clock. He was supposed to be at a client dinner prep meeting across town until 7. A tiny, unsettling knot tightened in my stomach. Maybe he forgot a file. Maybe he was sick too. I fumbled with the key, pushing the front door open. The silence that greeted me was heavy, not the usual domestic quiet, but a deliberate, unnerving stillness. My shoes clicked too loudly on the hardwood floor. I called out his name. "Ethan? Honey, are you here?" "No. Answer." The air conditioning was blasting, making the house feel like a tomb. As I moved past the living room and approached the staircase, a fragrance hit me. Sharp, floral, synthetic. It wasn't my scent, the subtle sandalwood and vanilla I favored. It was jasmine and gardenia, overwhelming and cheap, the exact scent that always clung to Caroline, our neighbor, my so-called friend, whenever she stopped by for coffee. The knot in my stomach turned to cold, liquid dread. My head stopped throbbing. The physical pain was instantly overridden by a chilling mental alertness. I ascended the stairs slowly, one measured step after another, listening only to the frantic thumping in my own chest. The hallway rug seemed to swallow the sound of my footsteps, creating a dreadful, muted approach. I saw the closed master bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, maybe half an inch. A sliver of light escaped. I stopped breathing. Everything narrowed down to the wooden grain of the door in front of me. I raised my hand, but hesitated. If I screamed, if I cried, if I lost control, I would lose everything. This wasn't the time for emotion. This was the time for evidence. I pulled my phone silently from my purse. My fingers, surprisingly steady, unlocked the screen and navigated to the camera app. I clicked record, praying the subtle red light indicating recording wouldn't be visible from inside. Then, with a force that felt entirely alien, I pushed the door open. The scene was instantaneous, brutal, and horrifyingly cliché. Ethan was tangled in the expensive high-thread count sheets I had bought for our anniversary, his eyes wide and panicked. And there was Caroline, her face contorted in a mix of shame and terror, pulling a pillow over her exposed chest. They weren't speaking. The only sound was the faint, synthesized pop music, filtering from the phone speaker they had foolishly left playing on the nightstand. A song about eternal love, of course. The color drained from the room, leaving everything in high contrast, like a photographic negative. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't drop my bag. I didn't even flinch. I just stood there, the iPhone held vertically, capturing the full, sickening scope of their betrayal. Ethan scrambled, grabbing the edge of the sheet. "Sarah, wait! It's not what—" "Quiet," I whispered. And the sound of my own voice, low and absolutely devoid of feeling, stopped him dead. It was the quiet that terrified them more than any shriek could have. I lowered the phone slightly, ensuring I got a clear shot of both their faces, the rumpled bed, the clothes tossed carelessly onto the Persian rug. I took 3 steps into the room, never breaking eye contact with them, my recording still running. The scent of that cheap jasmine perfume was suffocating now. I walked straight to the dresser, found the second set of keys to the house, and slipped them into my pocket. "Don't move," I instructed, my voice flat, professional, like a lawyer addressing a hostile witness. "Don't touch that phone. Don't speak." I backed out slowly, maintaining my filming angle until I was safely in the hallway. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, deliberately, and then, using the secondary deadbolt lock on the outside of the door, a lock we usually only engaged when traveling, I trapped them inside. The click of the bolt was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I leaned against the wall, allowing myself exactly 3 seconds to process the rush of adrenaline before moving on to the next phase. They were contained. The evidence was secured. My hands were shaking fiercely now, but my mind was a high-speed processor, calculating every liability, every asset, every move. I scrolled through my contacts. It wasn't enough to destroy Ethan. I needed to ensure Caroline suffered the absolute, collateral damage she deserved. And that meant involving the one person who would appreciate this footage even more than my divorce attorney would. I scrolled down until I found his name. David. Caroline's husband. My husband's unsuspecting business partner, and the man who thought he was spending his afternoon finalizing the details for their upcoming family vacation to the Caribbean. This wasn't about pain anymore. This was about reclaiming power. I pressed the call button, listening to the monotonous ring on the line, rehearsing the precise, controlled language. I had to be perfect. "David," I said, my voice steady, professional, deadly. "I think you need to come home right now. I have something critically important to show you about your wife and my husband." The blinding migraine was my unintended savior. I had been planning to work straight through until 7, finalizing the documents for the massive merger we'd been pushing for months. But the pain behind my eyes was immediate, paralyzing, and absolute. Around 3:30 p.m., I told my assistant I was done, grabbed my briefcase, missing nothing, I thought, and drove the familiar route from downtown D.C. back to the quiet, tree-lined streets of Georgetown. I needed silence, darkness, and the sanctuary of my own bed. The moment I parked in the driveway, a low, insistent hum started in my chest. Mark's black SUV was there. That was the first anomaly. He was supposed to be in Baltimore, closing the deal with the new supplier, a meeting he'd specifically mentioned would keep him late. I rationalized it immediately. Maybe the meeting finished early. Maybe he came home for a quick change of clothes. But as I opened the front door, the silence that met me was wrong. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of an empty house. It was the stifled, suffocating silence of anticipation. My briefcase clattered softly as it dropped onto the marble floor of the high foyer. The sound swallowed instantly by the heavy, thick air. Then the scent hit me. It was synthetic and overwhelming, a sickly, sweet floral perfume that I immediately recognized as Cynthia's. Our next-door neighbor, my supposed friend, the woman whose children often played in our garden. A cold knot formed low in my belly. I didn't call his name. I didn't want a denial, a clumsy lie thrown at me from the shadows. I gripped the railing of the grand staircase, pulling myself up slowly, deliberately. Each upward step was a countdown to a detonation. The blood pounded not just in my temples but in my ears, drowning out any faint sound from above. The scent grew stronger, warmer, mixing with the metallic tang of something cheap and desperate. I reached the landing. The master bedroom door, the solid oak barrier to the most private room in our home, was slightly ajar. I pushed the door open. I didn't burst in. I simply allowed gravity to move the door just enough for me to see. The afternoon sun, streaming through the sheer window curtains, cast them in a golden, dusty light, like a perverse spotlight on a stage. There they were, Mark and Cynthia. They weren't just kissing or holding hands, or sharing a discreet momentary lapse of judgment. They were intertwined, messy, and oblivious to the world outside their filthy bubble. The sight was not a sudden burst of agony, but a visceral, immediate punch to the solar plexus that stole my ability to breathe. For a split second, the world tilted, the colors muted, the sounds evaporated. I saw the sheets I had chosen, the pillows I fluffed every morning, now serving as a backdrop for the most profound betrayal of my life. They heard the slight creak of the door. Their heads snapped up in unison, eyes wide, paralyzed by the sight of me standing there, silent, an unwanted witness. The terror on their faces, the sheer, unadulterated panic, was the first small flicker of satisfaction I felt. It was swift and cold, cutting through the shock like surgical steel. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I did not cry. My reaction was instantaneous, driven by a primal need for evidence and control. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and with a hand that was miraculously steady, I aimed the camera lens at the bed. "Don't move," I instructed. the words barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. My voice was a flat monotone, frighteningly calm. I watched Mark fumble with the duvet, his mouth opening and closing uselessly. Cynthia looked like a trapped animal, trying to disappear into the pillows. I clicked the shutter repeatedly, documenting the scene from different angles, the position of their bodies, the disarray, the indisputable truth. I switched to video mode, just a few seconds of silent, damning footage, capturing their shame and their desperate attempts to cover themselves. When I was satisfied, I lowered the phone. I didn't need to stay and watch their pathetic attempts to minimize the situation. The evidence was secured. I took one last, long look at the man who had promised me forever and the woman who had pretended to be my friend. They were small, ugly, and pathetic. I stepped back, pulling the door completely shut with a gentle, definite click. The sound felt enormous in the quiet hall. I reached for the small, heavy antique key that had been sitting in a decorative bowl on the hall table for years, a useless relic until now. I inserted it into the lock, turned it, and heard the satisfying metallic thud of the bolt securing the door. They were trapped inside their own mess. I walked away from the locked door, the sweet, heavy perfume thankfully fading as I moved toward the staircase. My migraine was gone, replaced by an icy, absolute clarity. This wasn't just my disaster. It was David's too. David, Cynthia's husband, the kindest man in the cul-de-sac. He was probably sitting at his desk, trusting his wife implicitly, just as I had trusted my husband. He deserved the truth, and I needed an ally who understood the necessity of scorched earth. I leaned against the wall, my fingers already finding David's number in my contacts. My heart hammered, not from sorrow, but from the calculated adrenaline of strategy. I needed him to come home, to see the proof with his own eyes before the evidence could be contaminated or twisted. I took a deep, steadying breath, preparing my voice to be as controlled, as professional, and as lethal as possible. "David," I articulated when he answered, cutting through his cheerful, unsuspecting greeting. "I think you need to come home right now. I have something critically important to show you about your wife and my husband." I didn't wait for him to ask questions. I continued, my voice firm. "They are currently locked in my master bedroom. Do not call, do not text, just drive home immediately." "And David," I added, my final word a chilling promise, "don't worry about being discreet. I want you to make noise when you arrive." The migraine hit me like a physical punch right behind the eyes, making the fluorescent glare of the office unbearable. I knew I wouldn't be productive. I told my assistant I was heading home for the afternoon to work remotely, gathering my laptop and briefcase with a weary sigh. A simple, agonizing headache. That mundane detail became the critical hinge upon which my entire perfect life would swing open and shatter. The drive from the perimeter into our quiet Buckhead neighborhood was unusually fast. The silence in the car a welcome relief after the city noise. But as I pulled into our long, curved driveway, the relief vanished. There was an extra car parked close to the garage door, a black SUV. It was Sarah's, our neighbors, my supposed best friends. An immediate flicker of unease crossed my mind, but I extinguished it instantly. Maybe she needed to borrow a garden tool, or perhaps she was dropping off some paperwork. We shared a lot, including a deep trust. I parked behind Robert's sedan and killed the engine. The stillness that greeted me was unnatural. It wasn't the usual quiet of an empty house. It was a heavy, deliberate silence, the kind that dampens sound, because it's trying desperately to hide something. I opened the front door. The air conditioning was blasting, set far too low for a sunny afternoon. And then I smelled it. Jasmine. Not the light, fleeting fragrance you catch in a friendly hug, but a thick, cloying cloud of Sarah's signature. cheap perfume that hit me right in the sinuses. My headache, forgotten, replaced by a cold, sharp certainty that sliced through the shock. I didn't call out. I didn't shout, "Honey, I'm home!" My briefcase felt heavy and useless in my hand. Every fiber of my being went taut, switching from the exhausted wife seeking comfort to the silent, calculating observer. I moved like a shadow, creeping toward the staircase, letting the thick, woven carpet muffle my footsteps. The faint sounds were coming from upstairs, from the very core of our home, our master bedroom. The door was not closed properly. It was left ajar, just a hairline crack of dark wood and brass. Hardware, as if they had rushed inside, prioritizing speed over discretion. I held my breath, pushing the door inward just enough to widen the gap. What I saw was not a scene of spontaneous, passionate love, but a grubby, cheap betrayal, laid out on the pristine, dove-gray duvet I had spent weeks picking out. Robert, Sarah, a sickening, messy tangle. The sight was less devastating than the smell. The emotional pain wasn't a sudden explosion, but an immediate, profound freezing. It was the absolute ugly proof that everything I believed in, our vows, our trust, our quiet nights on the sofa, was a meticulously constructed lie. I did not scream. I did not drop my bag. I did not move to physically confront them. My reaction was robotic, strategic, and utterly devoid of emotion. My hand reached into my jacket pocket, pulling out my phone. The camera app opened, my fingers moving without conscious thought to switch to video recording. My hands were steady, shockingly so. I filmed them. I zoomed in just enough to capture their faces, contorted not in joy, but in reckless abandon. I captured the bedside table, the time glowing red on the digital clock. 2:37 p.m. I recorded the whole grotesque tableau for nearly a minute, cataloging the evidence like an investigator at a crime scene. They were so consumed, so arrogant in their secrecy, that they never heard the quiet whir of the lens adjusting. I was invisible, the silent spectator of my own marital execution. When I had enough, when the evidence was irrefutable and time-stamped, I retreated. I didn't slam the door. I pulled it softly, slowly, reducing the gap until it looked exactly as it had before, slightly ajar. My strategy was instant and cold. They had insulted my intelligence. Now they would pay the price for my composure. I walked down to the main floor, my eyes fixed on the framed photo of our wedding day, hanging next to the kapuaim thermostat. Behind that photo was the rarely used security keypad for the internal deadbolts. I keyed in the code, my fingers pressing the sequence for the master bedroom lockdown. Click. The sound was small, metallic, and utterly final. The heavy, commercial-grade deadbolt engaged, trapping them inside our sanctuary, turning it into their prison. They were mine now. I walked straight to the kitchen island, placing my briefcase down gently. I pulled up David's number, Sarah's husband, the kind, oblivious man who thought his wife was at a book club meeting and who believed my husband was his trusted golf buddy. My voice was eerily calm, the words already forming a precise legal strategy in my head. This wasn't about drama. It was about asset protection and absolute control. I inhaled deeply, tasting the lingering jasmine and wiping the migraine entirely from my consciousness. I pressed the call button. "David," I said, cutting through his cheerful, unsuspecting greeting. "I think you need to come home right now. I have something critically important to show you about your wife and my husband. They are currently locked in my master bedroom. Do not call, do not text. Just drive home immediately. And David," I added, my final word a chilling promise, "don't worry about being discreet. I want you to make noise when you arrive." I hung up before he could articulate the confusion that was already forming on his end. I took a slow sip of water, leaned back against the counter, and waited. The house was silent again, But the silence was different now. It was the silence before the storm, and I was the eye of the hurricane, utterly calm and ready to dismantle everything. I had the video evidence, I had the element of surprise, and I had a trapped audience upstairs. The game had just begun, and they had already lost. The truth is, I wasn't supposed to be home that Tuesday afternoon. I had a complex closing planned with my biggest client downtown, a meeting that should have consumed my entire day, chaining me to the office until well after dark. But fate, or perhaps a guardian angel disguised as physiological distress, intervened. Halfway across the city, the world dissolved into a blinding, throbbing agony. A classic migraine, the kind that steals your vision and makes sound feel like a physical assault. I couldn't drive. I certainly couldn't negotiate a multi-million-dollar contract. I pulled over, called my assistant to reschedule, and decided the only safe move was to retreat home, swallow the strongest medication I owned, and plunge the house into darkness. I was looking for refuge, not a confrontation. I drove the final few blocks with my eyes half closed, grateful for the familiar quiet of our suburban street in Seattle. When I pulled into the driveway, though, something immediately prickled the fine hairs on my neck. His black SUV was parked in the garage. That was odd. Mark worked late, always. He had a rigorous schedule, or so he claimed. I assumed he'd simply forgotten something or was taking a quick call before heading out again. I fumbled with the key, the silence of the house pressing in on me like cotton wool. The first hint that my quiet retreat had turned into a nightmare was olfactory. It hit me hard. A cheap, cloying fragrance, sweet and heavy, entirely unlike the crisp, expensive scent I usually wore. It smelled like desperation and department store bargain bins, a smell I shouldn't know, yet somehow recognized instantly. It was Sarah's perfume, my neighbor's signature scent. My migraine, momentarily forgotten, receded, replaced by a crystalline coldness that started in my stomach and spread rapidly through my veins. Every sound was amplified. I heard a faint, rhythmic creaking from upstairs, the sound of the floorboards in our master bedroom. No talking, no television, just that telltale friction, a silent, sickening confirmation. I didn't call his name. I didn't drop my bag. I walked with a deliberate, unnerving slowness up the polished mahogany staircase, each step a countdown to detonation. My heart was not racing. It was thudding with a heavy, steady beat, like a ceremonial drum announcing war. The smell grew stronger, sickeningly intimate, as I reached the landing. The door to our bedroom was slightly ajar. I stopped just outside, took a deep breath that tasted of betrayal and cheap jasmine, and pushed the heavy oak panel wide. The scene was instantaneous, shocking in its banality. It wasn't a whirlwind of passion. It was tawdry, messy, and pathetic. Mark, my husband of 15 years, was tangled in our expensive Egyptian cotton sheets, his face a mask of stupid, primal terror. And there she was, Sarah, my friend, the woman I shared coffee with every Tuesday morning, the one whose children played in our backyard, the one who borrowed my baking pans. She was staring at me, her eyes wide, the color draining from her cheeks until she was the shade of milk. For 1 second, the world tilted. The air was thick and loud, ringing with the silence of the unspoken horror. My body reacted not with the expected hysteria, but with surgical precision. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even drop the car keys still clutched in my right hand. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and with a hand so steady it felt alien, I unlocked it and hit the video record button. I didn't need to zoom in. The wide-angle shot captured the entire tableau. The rumpled bed, their exposed shame, the instant realization of being caught. I held the camera steady for 5 agonizing seconds, capturing their faces, their state of undress, and the undeniable violation of my most sacred space. "Get dressed," I said, my voice low, flat, and entirely devoid of emotion. It wasn't a plea or an accusation. It was an order. I didn't wait for a response. I stepped back, never breaking eye contact, and then executed the first strategic move of the war. I slammed the heavy oak door shut and turned the lock, hearing the satisfying, definitive click of the bolt sliding home. They were trapped, my prisoners. I walked straight to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of iced tea. No point in drinking water now. I needed the caffeine, and pulled up my contacts. The next player in this miserable drama needed to be informed. This wasn't just my home they had desecrated. It was Sarah's marriage, too. I scrolled down to Thomas, Sarah's husband. He was a quiet, decent man, Mark's golfing buddy, the kind of man who trusted implicitly. He was at work, likely staring at a spreadsheet, thinking his biggest problem was quarterly projections. I pressed the call button. When Thomas answered, his voice cheerful and unsuspecting, I cut straight through the pleasantries. "Thomas, it's Evelyn. I need you to come home immediately. No, don't ask why. Just drive, and don't call Sarah. It's about her. And Mark. They are currently locked in my bedroom, and I have photographic proof of everything. I want you here to witness the fallout." I hung up before he could articulate the confusion that was already forming on his end. I took a slow sip of tea, leaned back against the counter, and waited. The house was silent again, but the silence was different now. It was the silence before the storm, and I was the eye of the hurricane, utterly calm and ready to dismantle everything. I had the video evidence, I had the element of surprise, and I had a trapped audience upstairs. The game had just begun, and they had already lost. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. I was meant to be stuck in traffic on I-95, drowning in spreadsheets and corporate jargon until well past 6. The reason for my early return was painfully mundane. I had forgotten the original notarized deed for the new downtown property, a document Andrew, my husband, had insisted be signed today. My assistant called, frantic. It was a quick, necessary diversion, nothing more. I remember pulling the car into the driveway of our beautiful suburban home, a monument built on 12 years of supposed loyalty and mutual ambition. I was already calculating the time lost, mentally rehearsing the afternoon's meeting, when I noticed something unsettling. Andrew's black sedan was parked neatly inside the garage. The door was closed, the lights were off, suggesting he wasn't planning on leaving anytime soon. Strange. He had specifically told me his schedule was packed with clients until 5. I unlocked the front door, expecting the usual quiet hum of the house. Maybe the faint melody of our playlist or the soft clatter of the automated vacuum. Instead, there was absolute silence. A heavy, unnatural hush that pressed against my eardrums. My sensible heels clicked too loudly on the polished marble floor of the foyer. Then, the scent hit me. It wasn't the faint, familiar musk of Andrew's expensive cologne, nor the clean, citrusy air freshener I used. This was a perfume, thick, cloying, and intensely floral, like a garden suffocating under too much sun. It was Amelia's scent. Our neighbor, my friend, the woman, who came over every Tuesday for wine and shared every detail of her life with me. A cold certainty, sharper than any knife, sliced through my chest. It wasn't a suspicion. It was an undeniable, visceral fact. Every red flag I had intellectually dismissed over the last few months, the sudden, inexplicable late nights, the phone perpetually flipped screen down, the jumpiness when I entered a room, coalesced into this singular, terrible moment. I didn't call out. I didn't drop my briefcase. I moved purely on instinct, propelled by a primal need for truth, no matter how toxic. The stairs felt impossibly steep, each step an ascent into certain devastation. The master bedroom door wasn't closed properly. It was left slightly ajar, maybe an inch or two, a careless oversight by people consumed by recklessness. I hesitated for a breath that felt like an eternity, holding the heavy air in my lungs. I reached out a trembling hand and pushed. The world tilted. The scene was not explosive, but grotesquely intimate. Andrew was there, his face contorted in a momentary lapse of professional composure. Amelia was facing him, their bodies entangled on the pristine white duvet, the careless arrangement of their clothes already screaming the narrative. What shocked me most wasn't the violation of our vows, but the sheer brazen banality of it. They looked messy, common, and utterly stupid in their exposure. For one brief second, Andrew's eyes met mine, eyes wide with a raw, panicked fear that instantly confirmed every nightmare. The scream that clawed its way up my throat died on my tongue. I felt a sudden, profound disconnect, as if I were floating above my own body, watching a terrible film unfold. I realized with stunning clarity that screaming would solve nothing, crying would give them power. My reaction was pure ice. My hand, steady as a surgeon's, went straight for my phone. I didn't move past the threshold. I opened the camera, switched to video, and pressed record. I captured the room, their faces, the stunned paralysis that had frozen them mid-action. I focused on the expensive, telltale accessories. Andrew's custom watch on the nightstand, Amelia's recognizable bracelet. Evidence. Proof. I stood there for perhaps 30 seconds, a silent, unforgiving witness. They didn't move. They couldn't speak. I simply recorded their shame, cataloging the destruction of my life with clinical precision. Then, without a word, without a change in my expression, I lowered the phone and slowly, deliberately, pulled the door shut. The click of the latch was the sound of a vault ceiling. I wasn't trapping them inside. I was sealing myself off from their deceit. I walked back down the stairs, ignoring the pounding in my head and the earthquake in my chest. I needed a plan, and plans required facts. I went straight to the kitchen counter. There it was, Amelia's purse, abandoned in her rush, and inside, her phone, unlocked. The messages were devastating. Not just confirmation of their affair, but months of callous planning, thinly veiled insults directed at me, detailed descriptions of their lies. It was a digital archive of their betrayal. I sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through the vile history, not feeling rage, but a chilling sense of purpose. This wasn't just a fling. This was a calculated, long-term deception, and Amelia wasn't the only one who had a life to destroy. Mark, her husband, deserved to know. He deserved the same clarity I had just been handed. My fingers flew across the screen, finding Mark's contact information. I took a deep breath, banished every trace of emotion from my voice, and dialed. "Mark," I said, my voice unnervingly level. "We need to talk. Now. It concerns Amelia and Andrew. I have everything you need to see, and trust me, you are going to want to see it, all." I hung up before he could articulate the confusion that was already forming on his end. I took a slow sip of tea, leaned back against the counter, and waited. The house was silent again, but the silence was different now. It was the silence before the storm, and I was the eye of the hurricane, utterly calm and ready to dismantle everything. I had the video evidence, I had the element of surprise, and I had a trapped audience upstairs. The game had just begun, and they had already lost. The headache slammed into me somewhere near Santa Monica, a blinding, nauseating pressure that signaled the instant failure of my carefully planned afternoon meeting. I couldn't function. I couldn't even see the spreadsheets clearly. I apologized to the partners, mumbled something about a sudden stomach virus, and retreated. Driving back to Pasadena at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, felt like giving up. A massive professional failure. I didn't know then that this migraine was less a curse and more a divine alignment, putting me precisely where I needed to be for the truth to shatter my world. I pulled the Lexus into our driveway. The first thing that snagged my attention was Ethan's Honda. It shouldn't have been there. He always parked across the street when he finished his work early to avoid blocking the garage, especially on golf days. I dismissed the fleeting thought. Maybe he'd forgotten his briefcase. I unlocked the front door, stepping out of the brutal afternoon sun and into the cool, silent air of our home. The silence was the second red flag. It wasn't the usual comfortable quiet of an empty house. It was a pressurized, held breath. And then the scent hit me. Cloying, saccharine, and completely wrong. It was cheap jasmine, mixed with something musky and foreign to our marriage. It was the perfume Amelia, our neighbor, always bathed herself in. I froze, my briefcase slipping slightly in my grasp. "Don't jump to conclusions," the rational voice insisted. "Maybe she dropped off a package?" But the instinctual dread was already a cold knot in my gut, tighter than the migraine. I moved through the living room, every step cushioned by the thick rug. The only sound was the frantic thump of my own heart, and then, faint but undeniable, a low, rhythmic creaking coming from upstairs. I began to climb. Each step was a decision, a choice between turning back and preserving the lie, or facing the potential collapse of my universe. The jasmine grew sharper, suffocating. At the landing, the door to our master bedroom stood slightly ajar, a sliver of bright light escaping. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. The knowledge was already in the air, heavy and inescapable. I pushed the oak panel inward, slowly, allowing just enough space to confirm the horror. The sight was a still frame of betrayal, frozen in the glare of the afternoon sun that slanted across my bed, Ethan, and Amelia. Our kind, smiling neighbor, who borrowed my flower and admired my garden. They were scrambling, caught in the ugly geometry of their deceit. They hadn't heard the car, or they hadn't cared. Amelia's face, mottled red and desperate, locked on mine. Ethan, caught mid-reach for his discarded shirt, looked not angry or remorseful, but utterly, pathetically exposed. The expected scream never materialized. The expected tears never came. Instead, a glacial calm descended, an armor plating over my soul. This was not the time for emotion. This was the time for strategy. My hand, steady as stone, reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and pressed record. "Don't stop," I said, my voice shockingly level, devoid of any human warmth. It was the sound of a judge pronouncing sentence, not a wife discovering a lie. "Please, continue. I need to ensure the evidence is comprehensive." The panic in their eyes intensified, escalating from embarrassment to genuine terror at my composure. Ethan mumbled my name, a useless plea. Amelia covered her face with her hands, emitting a high, pitiful whimper. "It's not what it looks like, Sarah, I swear," Ethan began, crawling off the bed. "It is exactly what it looks like, Ethan," I interrupted, panning the camera deliberately from his naked torso to Amelia's discarded clothing on the floor. "And I appreciate you confirming the audio quality on this recording." I stopped filming when I felt I had enough to secure my future. I stepped back, slamming the door shut with a finality that shook the frame. I didn't lock it, because locking it would imply they could escape. They were trapped, not by a deadbolt, but by my sudden, absolute control. I descended the stairs, not running, but walking with the cold, deliberate pace of someone executing a plan rehearsed 1,000 times. I didn't need a lawyer yet. I needed an ally. I needed the final piece of the trap. I walked straight to the kitchen island, picked up the house phone, the one with David's direct office number saved on speed dial. David was Amelia's husband, a sweet man who coached Little League and trusted his wife implicitly. He answered on the third ring, sounding rushed. "David, it's Sarah," I said, my voice still unnervingly steady. "I'm sorry to pull you out of work, but I need you to come home right now. You need to take the rest of the day off. No, don't ask why. Just drive carefully. Bring your house key, and make sure your phone is recording when you walk in." I hung up before he could articulate the confusion that was already forming on his end. I took a slow sip of tea, leaned back against the counter, and waited. The house was silent again, but the silence was different now. It was the silence before the storm, and I was the eye of the hurricane, utterly calm and ready to dismantle everything. I had the video evidence, I had the element of surprise, and I had a trapped audience upstairs, and another one speeding toward our house. The game had just begun, and they had already lost. The pounding behind my eyes was not just stress, it was a physical hammer driving nails into my skull. I had to leave the lunch early. The high-powered negotiations, the clatter of silverware, the forced pleasantries, it all became a blinding, painful roar. I texted my assistant a vague excuse about an urgent family matter, grabbed my keys, and decided the only way to survive the afternoon was the blessed darkness and silence of our master bedroom. I certainly wasn't going to call Daniel and interrupt his crucial 2 p.m. meeting. As I pulled my Mercedes into the driveway of our meticulously maintained home in the quiet suburbs of Houston, the first flicker of unease ignited in my stomach. Daniel's black SUV was parked slightly askew in the garage, visible through the side window. That was wrong. He was supposed to be downtown, leading a client presentation that wouldn't wrap up until well after 5. I tried to smother the rising anxiety, rationalizing quickly. Maybe he forgot a necessary document. Maybe he had a sudden headache too. I turned the key in the front door lock. The house was too silent. Not the usual weekday silence of an empty home, but a specific, heavy quiet, the kind that swallows sound whole. I stepped inside and immediately felt the shift in the atmosphere. The temperature was too high, the air thick, almost suffocating. And then I smelled it. It wasn't the subtle, expensive blend of sandalwood and fig I preferred. It was heavy, cloying, overtly floral. Cheap jasmine, sickeningly sweet, the kind that attacks the senses. Chloe's scent. My stomach clenched, not in nausea from the headache, but in sudden, blinding dread. Chloe, our neighbor, my confidant, the woman I trusted implicitly with my deepest fears and my most superficial gossip. I didn't call out his name. I didn't drop my briefcase. My body moved on autopilot, fueled by a cold, dreadful certainty. I walked past the pristine kitchen, ignoring the untouched light reflecting off the granite countertop. Every step on the hardwood floor seemed deafeningly loud, yet my own breathing felt impossibly shallow. The stairs stretched before me, a silent, carpeted ascent into the unknown. I took them slowly, deliberately, not wanting to alert the inhabitants of the disaster zone upstairs. With every step toward the master suite, the jasmine scent intensified, mingling now with a faint, masculine musk that was unquestionably Daniel's. I reached the landing. The door to our sanctuary, the place where we were supposed to build our future, was closed. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the throbbing in my head forgotten, replaced by a crystalline clarity. That chilled me to the bone. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. I didn't knock. I didn't plead. I simply reached out and placed my hand on the brass knob. It was slightly warm. I turned it slowly, controlling the mechanism so the latch barely scraped the frame. I pushed the door inward just a fraction of an inch. enough to confirm the geometric shapes and shadows bathed in the diffused afternoon light that filtered through the sheer silk curtains. The sight was not explicit in the way cheap fiction describes, but it was absolute. It was the undeniable truth carved out of betrayal. Daniel, stripped down to his core, and Chloe, her familiar blonde hair a sickening contrast against the silk of my pillows. The intimate posture, the careless abandon of their clothes scattered on the floor. It was a full-stop confirmation of the end of my life as I knew it. My heart didn't race. It seemed to stop entirely, a solid block of ice in my chest. The betrayal wasn't a burning fire. It was a vacuum, sucking all the warmth and color from the world. My reaction was immediate, clinical, and devoid of the hysteria they likely expected. I did not scream. I did not drop to my knees. The lawyer in me took over, demanding evidence. I slipped my phone out of my pocket, unlocked the screen, and switched instantly to video mode. My hand, surprisingly steady, held the phone up, positioning the lens through the narrow gap I had created. I recorded them for precisely 40 seconds. 40 seconds of visual proof, documentation of the destruction of my marriage, my trust, and my friendship. This wasn't for me to watch. This was for the court, for the leverage, for the complete dismantling of their lives. Once the evidence was secured, I retreated, pulling the door shut with the same terrifying gentleness. The click of the latch was almost inaudible, sealing them inside the mausoleum of my past life. I didn't walk. I glided down the stairs, every movement precise and deliberate. My priority shifted instantly from shock to execution. My first thought was not revenge, but strategic control. I went straight to Daniel's home office, pulling the spare key to the master suite from the antique Chinese puzzle box, where we kept important documents. I returned upstairs, inserted the key into the deadbolt, and turned it firmly. Click. They were officially trapped. I returned to the office, settling into Daniel's leather chair behind his pristine mahogany desk. I bypassed the address book and went straight to my contacts. I didn't waste time calling a lawyer yet. That required a clear head, which I almost had. I had a more pressing duty first. I dialed the number I knew by heart. It rang twice before he answered, his voice professional, slightly muffled by background noise. "Mark?" I said, my voice shockingly level, devoid of any emotional inflection that might clue him in. "I am so sorry to call you at work, but I need you to come to my house immediately. This is not negotiable. Do not call Chloe. Do not call Daniel. Just come home. You need to see this." I didn't wait for his confusion or his questions. I hung up the phone. Mark, Chloe's devoted, oblivious husband, was now speeding toward our house, unaware he was walking into a trap set by a woman whose life had just shattered into 1,000 recoverable pieces. I sat back, the video file safely stored, and waited for the show to begin. They thought they had time. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. The reckoning had just started. The blinding migraine hit me hard around noon, the kind that steals your vision and demands surrender. That relentless throbbing, centered right behind my eyes, was the only reason I drove back home to our quiet, tree-lined street in Seattle 4 hours earlier than planned. I wasn't supposed to be there. I had back-to-back meetings downtown, a typical Tuesday grind. I texted Daniel, telling him I was cutting the day short to rest. He replied instantly, "Get some rest, love. Hope you feel better." The concern felt genuine, the lie perfectly masked by routine care. I pulled the Lexus into the driveway. Daniel's black sedan was already there, perfectly centered in the garage. Odd. He almost never came home for lunch, preferring to grab a quick sandwich near his firm. If he did, he usually parked on the street, leaving the garage spot free for me. A cold, metallic dread, sharper than the migraine, replaced the pain behind my eyes. I fumbled with the keys, my fingers suddenly numb, and pushed the front door open. The silence inside was not the comforting quiet of an empty house. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of an act interrupted, a moment held captive. And then I smelled it. The air felt thick, cloying, and distinctly floral, not the familiar scent of my own home, not the lavender candles I favored. This was Chloe's signature perfume, that expensive, sickeningly sweet gardenia note that clung to the air like a stain, a vile, invisible trail leading directly upstairs. My purse slipped silently from my shoulder, hitting the polished hardwood floor without a sound that registered in my panicked ears. Every nerve ending in my body was suddenly screaming a warning, but my feet moved, silently, mechanically, up the carpeted stairs. I walked past the framed photos of our last trip to the coast, past the antique dresser we bought together. I was a ghost moving through my own mausoleum. I stopped outside the bedroom door. The handle, a heavy brass knob, felt freezing beneath my palm. I could hear them now. Not shouting, not fighting, but the low, muffled sounds of intimacy, interspersed with soft, familiar laughter. That casualness was the first dagger. They weren't sneaking around. They were comfortable. They belonged there, apparently. I inhaled, tasting the sickening truth, and turned the knob slowly. The sight wasn't a melodramatic explosion of rage and tears, though my entire world was imploding. It was worse. It was the shocking banality of absolute betrayal. They were on our bed, the silk duvet crumpled around them, their bodies intertwined. Daniel's arm was draped over her, his head turned toward the window, looking so relaxed, so completely present. Chloe, my best friend, the woman I trusted with the location of my spare key and the passwords to my soul, was smiling up at him. They didn't see me. They were lost in their own shared world, a secret reality built upon my blind faith. I didn't scream. I didn't rush forward to claw at them or demand answers. The rage that erupted in my chest was not hot. It was surgical, freezing, and precise. Screaming would only give them the power to lie, to minimize, to confuse the narrative. I needed undeniable proof. My phone, already in my hand from texting Daniel earlier, felt suddenly heavy, a weapon forged by modern technology. I silently flipped the camera app open, pressed record, and held it steady. I didn't zoom in on them, not exactly. Instead, I focused on the context. The wedding photo on the nightstand, deliberately turned face down. Chloe's expensive, recognizable bracelet thrown carelessly onto the oriental. Rug, the shocking familiarity of their hands tangled in the duvet. I recorded the sounds, the low murmurs, the damning visual context that confirmed this was not a one-time drunken mistake, but an established pattern of deceit. When I felt I had enough, a full minute of evidence that no court or family member could dispute, I backed away, inch by agonizing inch, closing the door as gently and silently as I had opened it. They hadn't heard me. They were too preoccupied with their perfidy. I retreated downstairs, my knees weak, and locked myself into the small guest bathroom off the mudroom. My hands were shaking so violently I had to brace them against the sink, but my mind was laser-focused, calculating. Daniel and Chloe had shared an intimate secret. Now, it was time to deploy the trap and share a devastating truth with the one person who deserved to know just as much as I did. Mark. I scrolled through my contacts. Mark's earnest, slightly bewildered face flashed on the screen. He was a good man, a dedicated father to their 2 young children, and he was about to have his world destroyed by the woman I had just recorded. I took a deep, steadying breath, practicing my line, stripping my voice of any tremor or emotion. "Mark," I whispered into the phone, my voice flat, controlled. "It's Sarah. Don't call Daniel. Just come home. You need to see this." I didn't wait for his inevitable confusion or his questions. I hung up the phone. Mark, Chloe's devoted, oblivious husband, was now speeding toward our house, unaware he was walking into a trap set by a woman whose life had just shattered into 1,000 recoverable pieces. I sat back, the video file safely stored, and waited for the show to begin. They thought they had time. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. The reckoning had just started. The reckoning had just started. I had left the downtown office around 2 o'clock, which was highly unusual for me. I usually push through until at least 6, but a blinding, stabbing migraine had seized the back of my skull, the kind that made the fluorescent lights of the accounting floor unbearable. I needed silence and darkness, and I told my assistant I was heading back to our quiet, suburban home in Bellevue, fully expecting to find the place empty, save for maybe the housekeeper finishing up the kitchen. It was Tuesday. Scott was supposed to be in a long-winded client meeting across the Sound, and Chloe, our friendly, omnipresent neighbor, was scheduled to be teaching her pottery class. Everything was supposed to be normal. The first tremor of unease hit me the moment I pulled into the driveway. Scott's black SUV was parked slightly crookedly, hugging the curb near the rhododendrons. I froze, my hand hovering over the garage door opener. Why wasn't it in the garage? He hated leaving it exposed to the elements. Maybe he had forgotten something critical and rushed back out? I dismissed the thought, chalking it up to my pounding headache making me paranoid. I parked my car silently behind his, grabbed my purse, and walked toward the front door. The air inside the foyer was heavy, thick with a scent that didn't belong. It wasn't the faint pine and lemon of the cleaning supplies. It was Chloe's signature perfume, something expensive, floral, and utterly distinctive. I wore light, clean scents. Scott knew that. My stomach clenched, the nausea of the migraine momentarily replaced by a cold, sharp dread. The silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard, the kind of silence that suggests everyone is holding their breath. I moved through the living room, my heels making no sound on the imported marble. My keys felt heavy in my hand, ready to be used as a weapon. I ascended the stairs slowly, each step a deliberate choice, each breath shallow. I knew with the ghee, terrifying certainty that only pure instinct provides, that I was no longer walking into a darkened sanctuary, but into a hostile takeover. The master bedroom door was ajar, maybe an inch. Enough. I didn't need to push it open fully. I didn't need to hear anything. The sight that filtered through that narrow gap was enough to obliterate 20 years of shared memories and unwavering trust. There they were, my husband, Scott, who promised me forever under the Tuscan sun, and Chloe, the woman whose kids I babysat, the woman who shared my wine and my secrets across the fence, intertwined on the pristine white sheets of my bed. It wasn't a passionate scene. It was sickeningly casual, almost boring. They looked comfortable, like this was routine, a Tuesday afternoon fixture. The shock didn't make me scream, or cry, or drop the keys. It was a physical jolt that drove the blood straight out of my face, leaving me a hollow shell filled only with the clarity of ice water. Rage was too loud. Panic was too messy. I needed control. My phone was still in my hand, having just been used to cancel my afternoon calls. My fingers, guided by some primal self-preservation instinct, unlocked the screen, navigated to the camera app, and switched to video. I pushed the door open just enough to capture the full, undeniable tableau, the specific pattern of the duvet, the sunlight streaming in the window, their faces, their betrayal. I held it steady, filming for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 45 seconds, ensuring I captured enough context to prove the time, the place, and the sheer audacity of their disrespect. When I had the proof, the irrefutable evidence of my shattered life. I didn't confront them. I didn't whisper or shout. I backed away from the door as silently as I had approached, my mind already executing the next steps like a flawless military operation. I slipped down the stairs, went straight to the large utility closet, and retrieved the spare key to the master bedroom door, a heavy, old-fashioned lock we rarely used. With the master door quietly locked from the outside, trapping them inside their messy little secret, I went to the main security panel. I changed the code. I deactivated their key fobs. I locked every exterior door, including the garage entrance. They were guests in my home, and now they were confined until I decided their fate. My heart was beating a slow, steady drum of pure calculation. This wasn't about tears anymore. It was about strategy and assets. I sat down at the kitchen island, pulling up Mark's contact information. Poor, kind Mark. He was probably stuck in traffic, oblivious, still thinking his wife was helping old ladies throw clay onto a wheel. I waited until I heard the distant, low rumble of a powerful engine approaching the driveway. Mark was here, right on time. I took a deep breath, smoothing the skirt of my dress. I was about to unleash chaos, but I needed to maintain the composure of a surgeon. I texted Mark quickly, a single sharp command. Don't use your key. Just come home. You need to see this. I didn't wait for his inevitable confusion or his questions. I hung up the phone. Mark, Chloe's devoted, oblivious husband, was now speeding toward our house, unaware he was walking into a trap set by a woman whose life had just shattered into 1,000 recoverable pieces. I sat back, the video file safely stored, and waited for the show to begin. They thought they had time. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. The reckoning had just started. I didn't wait for his inevitable confusion or his questions. I hung up the phone. Mark, Chloe's devoted, oblivious husband, was now speeding toward our house, unaware he was walking into a trap set by a woman whose life had just shattered into 1,000 recoverable pieces. I sat back, the video file safely stored, and waited for the show to begin. They thought they had time. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. The reckoning had just started. While the silence in the living room upstairs was thick with their panic, I could hear David's frantic whispering and Chloe's muffled sobs. I moved to the office. I didn't want to waste a single second of clarity. David often kept a secondary tablet, locked but linked to his primary devices, tucked away in the safe. My intuition, sharp as a shard of glass now, told me to check the archived chats. I entered the code I had known since our honeymoon. The screen lit up, illuminating the depth of the rot. It wasn't just physical betrayal. It was years of emotional sabotage. There were messages dating back almost 2 years, detailed plans for weekend trips, shared jokes about my work schedule, and casual cruelty disguised as intimate banter. They weren't just lovers. They were collaborators plotting against me. I saw texts where David complained about having to pretend to care about my career successes, and Chloe replying with laughing emojis, saying things like, "At least she pays for the nice things we get to enjoy." They were mocking my trust, celebrating my blindness. The sting wasn't the sex. The true agony was realizing I had lived next to 2 poisonous snakes who drank from my well and shared whispers about how dull the water tasted. I took screenshots of everything, hundreds of pages of evidence, saving them to the cloud and forwarding them directly to the private email of the family lawyer I had consulted years ago, just in case. The sound of a car braking sharply outside shattered my focus. Mark had arrived. I put the tablet down, smoothed my dress, and walked slowly toward the stairs. I needed to look like the calm eye of the storm. David and Chloe were already descending, their faces chalky, white, their clothes hastily adjusted. They stopped dead when they saw me, then their eyes darted to the front door, which Mark was now throwing open. What is going on, Sarah? Mark's voice was strained, caught between anxiety and genuine confusion. I didn't answer him. I addressed David, my voice level, almost conversational. David, perhaps you and Chloe would like to explain to Mark why his wife is currently running around our master bedroom half-dressed. Chaos erupted. Chloe shrieked Mark's name. David lunged forward, trying to grab my arm. Sarah, stop this. We can talk. It was nothing. Just once. Just once, I repeated, holding up my phone, which was now recording their interaction. I let Mark watch the video I'd taken moments ago. His face went through 3 distinct stages: disbelief, horror, and then pure, volcanic rage. Mark didn't yell. He looked at Chloe, and the silence he deployed was terrifying. Meanwhile, David was still, trying to minimize the disaster, his voice rising in panic. It was a mistake. We were drunk. It didn't mean anything to us. Don't ruin everything, Sarah, please. I stepped back, showing him the tablet screen with the archived chats. Drunk and a mistake doesn't happen over 2 years, David, and it certainly doesn't involve planning trips to Miami while discussing how much you pity me for having to handle the bookkeeping. I panned the camera from the tablet to David's pleading face, to Mark, who had finally turned away from the screen, focusing solely on the devastation his wife had wrought. Save your excuses for the judge, I stated, pulling an envelope from my pocket. This is not a negotiation. It is a termination of partnership. The envelope contained 2 things: a temporary restraining order forcing David to vacate the premises immediately, and a formal notification from my legal team, detailing the evidence of infidelity and financial misconduct, using joint funds for those business trips with Chloe. David stared at the documents, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He had banked on my emotional collapse. He had not banked on my legal preparation. The locks have already been changed electronically, I continued, pushing the envelope into his chest. Your office access codes are revoked. You have 30 minutes to gather essentials. Anything else will be shipped to the address you made. Provide to the court. As for you, Chloe, Mark is your problem now. You both need to leave my property. The humiliation was absolute. Mark looked at Chloe with such crushing disappointment that it was far worse than any shouting match. He simply shook his head, took his keys, and walked out the front door, slamming it behind him. He hadn't said goodbye to her. He had simply erased her. David and Chloe were left standing together, their illicit connection now just a pile of ashes, exposed and ugly. They looked at me, hoping for a sign of weakness, a crack in the armor. They found none. I stood by the door, watching them scramble to gather a few pathetic belongings. The sight of David carrying a worn backpack, the same man who once promised me forever, evoked nothing but profound disinterest. When they finally stumbled out the door, 2 broken, disgraced people, I didn't lock it quickly. I savored the sound of the deadbolt sliding home, sealing the end of that chapter forever. The air inside the house instantly felt cleaner, lighter. The following months were a blur of paperwork, renovations, and rediscovery. The divorce was swift, painless for me, and financially devastating for David, thanks to the undeniable evidence in our prenup. I sold the house in the suburbs, that monument to lies, and bought a stunning penthouse downtown, embracing the vibrant energy of the city. I traveled, reconnected with friends David had subtly pushed away, and poured my energy back into my true passions. The darkness didn't last. It was merely a necessary transition. Years passed. The memory of David and Chloe became distant, like a poorly written movie I had thankfully walked out of early. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, while enjoying an espresso at a sun-drenched cafe in a new neighborhood, I saw him. David. He was sitting at a table across the street, wearing a jacket that looked too cheap for his frame, arguing intensely into a phone. He looked tired, older than he should, burdened. He hadn't noticed me. I watched him for a full minute, waiting for the flicker of resentment, the surge of pain, or even a nostalgic ache. Nothing. He was just a man. A completely ordinary, sad man who once occupied space in my life. The indifference was absolute, chillingly complete. It wasn't forgiveness. It was erasure. He simply didn't matter anymore. That lack of feeling, that was the ultimate victory. I finished my coffee, paid the bill, and walked away, turning my back on his existence without a second thought. Listen to me. If you are currently navigating a situation where betrayal has shattered your world, you are not defined by their failures. Your pain is valid, but your reaction must be strategic. Do not scream, do not beg, and certainly do not lower yourself to their level. Use your mind, gather your evidence, and control the narrative. The best, revenge is not rage. It is living a life so spectacular, so full of peace and self-respect, that their absence is the greatest gift you have ever received. If this story resonated with your own journey of strength and recovery, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And tell me, where are you listening to this story from right now? Drop your city and the time in the comments below. Until next time, remember, you are the author of your own epic. Write a better ending.